Commander Vex sat in his dark metal chair, surrounded by glowing screens that covered the walls of his command center. The lights from the displays cast blue and green shadows across his gray alien face. His 4 eyes moved quickly as he read through files that contained information about dozens of different species across the galaxy. The Kaleri hegemony had been collecting this data for hundreds of years, and every piece of information helped them decide which worlds to conquer next. The room was quiet, except for the soft humming of the ship's engines. Vex enjoyed these moments, when he could study their next targets without interruption. He had been a commander for 20 years, and in that time, he had helped the hegemony take control of 43 different star systems. Each conquest had been easier than the last because they always learned from their previous battles. His long fingers touched the control panel, and a new file appeared on the main screen. The header reads Species Classification, Humans Origin, Sol System, Sector 7 Alpha. Vex leaned forward with interest. This was a species he had not studied before, though he had heard other commanders mention them in passing during strategy meetings. The first section contained basic biological information. Humans were bipedal creatures with only 2 eyes, which seemed like a significant disadvantage. They had soft skin, instead of the hard scales that most advanced species possessed. Their average lifespan was much shorter than the Kaleri, and they required specific atmospheric conditions to survive. Vex shook his head in disappointment. These creatures seemed fragile and weak. Captain. Roth entered the command center, carrying a datapad filled with additional reports. Roth was younger than Vex, but had proven himself capable during their recent campaigns against the mineral-rich worlds of the Vega sector. His silver uniform was perfectly clean, and his weapons were polished to a bright shine. Like all good Kalari officers, he took pride in his appearance and his duty to the hegemony. Sir, I have finished reviewing the psychological profiles of the human species, Roth said as he approached the commander's station. The information is quite revealing. Vex gestured for his aide to continue speaking while he scrolled through more data on his screen. The intelligence reports came from various sources. Some information had been gathered by hegemony spy ships that had observed human settlements from a distance. Other details came from captured communications that their technology experts had decoded. A few reports were based on direct contact between hegemony scouts and human vessels, though these encounters had been brief and limited. According to our analysis, humans are extremely emotional creatures, Roth explained while reading from his datapad. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. When threatened, they become reckless and unpredictable. This behavior has been observed in every encounter our forces have had with them. Vex nodded as he read similar information on his own screen. The psychological profile painted a picture of a species that was controlled by primitive instincts. Humans, apparently, formed strong emotional bonds with their family members and fellow soldiers. They were willing to sacrifice themselves for others, which the Kaleri considered to be a serious weakness. Any species that put individual feelings above practical strategy would be easy to defeat. The technology assessment was even more disappointing. Human ships were slow and inefficient compared to hegemony vessels. Their weapons were crude and limited in range. They had not yet developed the advanced shield systems that protected Kaleri warships, and their armor was thin and easily penetrated. Most importantly, they had no experience fighting against a force as powerful and organized as the hegemony. The database shows they are classified as a Class 4 civilization, Vex said, while pulling up additional files. They have barely mastered faster than light travel. Their longest space voyages take months to complete journeys that our ships can finish in days. Roth moved closer to examine the tactical displays. How many colony worlds do they control, sir? Vex checked the star charts that showed human territory. Fewer than 20 systems, and most of those are barely developed outposts. Their total population is small, and they have no significant military alliances with other species. They are completely isolated in their corner of the galaxy. The more information Vex reviewed, the more confident he became that humans would pose no real challenge to hegemony forces. He had seen this pattern many times before during his military career. Young species that had recently discovered space travel always believed they were stronger than they actually were. They would make brave speeches and threaten to fight, but when faced with the overwhelming power of the hegemony war machine, they always surrendered or were quickly destroyed. "Tell me about our previous encounters with similar species," Vex said to his aide. Roth activated a holographic display that showed the results of recent hegemony campaigns. "In the past operational cycle, we have successfully subjugated 17 different species with comparable technology levels and military capabilities. The average time required for complete conquest was 8 days. The longest resistance lasted 3 weeks, and that was only because the enemy scattered across multiple star systems. The holographic images showed burning cities, destroyed fleets, and defeated alien armies. Each conquest had followed the same basic pattern. The hegemony would arrive in overwhelming force, demonstrate their superior firepower, and demand immediate surrender. Most species submitted without significant fighting, once they realized they could not win. Those that chose to resist were eliminated quickly and efficiently." Vex studied the tactical reports with satisfaction. The hegemony had perfected their methods through centuries of expansion across the galaxy. They knew exactly how to break the spirit of their enemies and force them into submission. Standard intimidation protocols had never failed, and there was no reason to believe that humans would be any different from the dozens of other species they had conquered. "These humans will follow the same pattern as all the others," Dex said confidently as he closed the intelligence files. "They will make threats and promises to fight, but when our ships arrive at their homeworld, they will realize the futility of resistance." The command center fell silent as both officers contemplated their next campaign. In 300 years of expansion, the Kaleri hegemony had never encountered a species that could stand against their war machine. Their technology was superior, their strategy was proven, and their soldiers were experienced. These primitive humans from the distant Sol system would be just another easy victory to add to their long list of conquests. The cargo vessel Liberties. Hope moved slowly through the darkness of space, its old engines humming with a steady rhythm that Captain Mike Torres had grown to love over his 15 years of flying freight runs across the galaxy. The ship was not beautiful by any standard. Its hull bore the scars and dents from countless journeys through asteroid fields and dangerous space lanes. Paint had peeled away in several places, revealing the bare metal underneath. But Torres knew every bolt and wire in his vessel, and despite its rough appearance, Liberty's hope had never failed to complete a mission. Torres stood on the bridge, his weathered hands gripping the metal railing as he stared out at the massive Kaleri warships that blocked their path to the Centauri system. The alien vessels were sleek and deadly, their dark hulls reflecting no light from the distant stars. Each ship was 3 times the size of his cargo hauler, and their weapon arrays glowed with an ominous blue energy that made Torres feel cold despite the warm air circulating through his ship's life support systems. Behind him, his crew worked quietly at their stations. Beth Martinez sat at the engineering console, her fingers dancing across the controls as she monitored the ship's power systems. She had joined his crew 2 years ago after her previous captain retired, and Torres had quickly learned to trust her expertise with machinery. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her coveralls were stained with grease from the morning's maintenance work on the cargo. Bay Doors. Tom Jackson occupied the navigator's station, his young face illuminated by the soft glow of star charts and course calculations. He was the newest member of the crew, barely 25 years old, but he had a natural talent for finding safe routes through dangerous space. His steady hands had guided them through many difficult situations, and Torres had come to rely on his quick thinking during emergencies. Lisa Chen handled communications from her position near the main view screen. She was quiet by nature, but her ability to intercept and decode transmissions had saved their lives more than once. Her equipment was old, but well maintained, and she could coax signals from sources that newer systems would miss entirely. Today, her face was tense with worry as she monitored the Kaleri military frequencies. The cargo hold of Liberties. Hope contained something more precious than gold or rare minerals. Stacked in carefully sealed containers were medical supplies desperately needed by the colonies in the Centauri system. A plague had broken out 3 months ago, and the colonial government had sent urgent requests for help throughout human space. Torres had volunteered for the dangerous mission because he had friends living on those worlds. People who would die if the medicine did not arrive soon. The Kaleri hegemony had established a quarantine zone around the Centauri system, claiming that the plague might spread to other worlds if ships were allowed to travel freely. But Torres knew the real reason for the blockade. The hegemony wanted the colonies to fail so they could claim the valuable mining rights on those planets. They were using the medical emergency as an excuse to expand their territory. "Commander," Vex's voice crackled through the communication system, cold and emotionless, like all Kaleri military officers. "This is Commander Vex of the Kaleri hegemony. You will surrender your cargo and submit for processing." Torres felt his jaw clench with anger, but he kept his voice steady as he activated the CUM system. "Negative, hegemony vessel. We're carrying medical supplies for the Centauri colonies. People are dying down there." There was a brief pause before Vex responded. "Their fate is of no concern to us. Surrender now or be destroyed." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet beeping of various monitoring systems. Torres could feel the eyes of his crew watching him, waiting for his decision. He had known this moment might come when they accepted the mission. The hegemony rarely allowed ships to pass through their blockades, regardless of humanitarian concerns. Beth spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Captain, those colonists have children. The plague hits kids the hardest." Tom nodded in agreement. "My sister lives on Centauri Prime. She has a baby daughter." Lisa turned from her communications panel. "I'm picking up distress signals from the surface. The hospitals are overflowing." Torres looked at each member of his crew, seeing the determination in their eyes. These were good people who had signed up for a cargo run, but were now facing a life or decision. They could surrender the medical supplies and live, knowing that thousands of innocent people would die from the plague, or they could try to run the blockade and risk everything to save lives. The captain made his choice. He keyed the CUM system one final time, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "You want these supplies? Come and take them." His hand moved to the engine controls, pushing the throttles to maximum power. Liberty's hope surged forward, accelerating toward the planet that lay beyond the Kaleri blockade. The old ship groaned under the strain, but its engines responded faithfully to their captain's command. Alarms began sounding on the Kaleri warships as their targeting systems locked onto the escaping cargo vessel. Vex's voice boomed across all frequencies. "Destroy them." Energy beams lanced through space, brilliant streaks of deadly light that reached across the darkness toward Liberty's hope. Torres gripped the controls tighter, throwing his ship into evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible for a larger vessel. For a few precious seconds, it seemed like they might escape. Then the first beam struck their port engine, sending shockwaves through the entire ship. Sparks flew from control panels, and the lights flickered as power systems failed. A second blast tore through the cargo bay, and Torres knew their journey was over. Beth called out damage reports from her station. "Hull breach in sections 4 and 5. We're losing atmosphere." Tom's voice was calm despite their desperate situation. "Engines are offline. We're dead in space." Lisa worked frantically at her communications equipment. "I can still transmit, but not for long." Torres reached for the emergency broadcast system, knowing he had only moments before their ship was completely destroyed. His final transmission would reach every human vessel and colony within 50 light-years, carrying a message that would change everything. "Remember my name," he said into the cum, as Liberty's hope exploded in a brilliant flash of light. "Remember them all." The crystalline chambers of the Hegemony War Council stretched high above the assembled military leaders, their transparent walls catching and reflecting the light from a dozen different star systems visible through the massive viewing ports. The room had been carved from a single enormous crystal found in the heart of a dead planet, and its natural formations created perfect acoustics that carried every whispered word to every corner of the space. Ancient Kalari symbols were etched into the walls, telling the story of 3 centuries of conquest and expansion across the galaxy. Supreme Commander Vex sat at the head of the circular table, his imposing figure casting long shadows across the polished surface. His ceremonial armor bore the marks of 100 battles, and his 4 eyes glowed with the confidence of a leader who had never known defeat. Around him sat the other members of the War Council, each one a veteran commander, who had proven their worth through years of successful campaigns. The air in the chamber was thick with the scent of victory and the weight of absolute power. Commander Vex stood before the assembled council, his uniform crisp and his posture straight as he delivered his report on the recent encounter with the human cargo vessel. His voice echoed through the crystal chamber as he described the destruction of Liberty's hope and the death of its crew. The other council members listened with mild interest, treating the incident as nothing more than routine pest control. The engagement lasted approximately 4 minutes. Vex continued, reading from his datapad. "The human vessel attempted to run our blockade, despite clear warnings to surrender. We followed standard protocol and eliminated the threat. There were no survivors." General Mox, a scarred veteran of the Outer Rim campaigns, leaned back in his chair with obvious boredom. 4 minutes seems excessive for a single cargo hauler. Are our weapons systems becoming less efficient? Vex shifted uncomfortably. The human captain attempted evasive maneuvers. "Sir, their ship was more agile than our initial scans indicated." Admiral Keth, who controlled the Hegemony's largest battle fleet, made a dismissive gesture with her clawed hand. "Desperation, often, makes prey appear more dangerous than it actually is. These humans are no different from the dozens of other species we have encountered in recent years." The War Council had gathered in this chamber countless times over the past decades, always to discuss the next phase of hegemony expansion. The routine had become so familiar that most of the commanders could predict the outcome of any meeting before it began. A new species would be identified, their military capabilities would be assessed, and a conquest plan would be developed. The results were always the same. Supreme Commander Vex studied the holographic display that showed the location of human space relative to current hegemony territory. The Sol system appeared as a small blue dot surrounded by a handful of even smaller colonies scattered across nearby star systems. The entire human civilization occupied less space than a single hegemony sector, and their combined military force was smaller than the reserve fleet stationed at just one of their major bases. "What is our assessment of human military strength?" Vex asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Vex activated a new section of his report. Intelligence estimates place their total fleet strength at fewer than 300 vessels, most of which are converted civilian ships with minimal weapons. They have no dedicated warships, larger than a light cruiser. Their technology is at least 50 years behind our current standards. The council members exchanged glances of amusement. Fleet Admiral Zorks, whose forces had conquered the resource-rich Belton systems just 2 years earlier, actually chuckled at the numbers. 300 ships. We destroyed more than that in a single engagement during the vegan campaign. Their home-world defenses are equally pathetic, Vex continued. Earth maintains a small orbital defense grid, but our preliminary scans indicate it would be unable to stop even a moderate assault force. They appear to rely primarily on the assumption that their remote location provides adequate protection. Vex nodded with satisfaction. The pattern was exactly what he had expected. Young civilizations always made the same mistakes. They focused on expanding their territory rather than building proper defenses. They trusted in diplomacy and negotiations rather than preparing for war. They believed that their good intentions would protect them from species with more practical approaches to galactic politics. I recommend deploying a small patrol fleet to their homeworld for formal submission, Vex concluded. Standard intimidation protocols should be sufficient to secure their surrender without significant resistance. The Supreme Commander's laugh was a harsh sound that echoed through the crystal chamber like breaking glass. These primitives threaten us, a handful of converted cargo haulers against the might of the hegemony. His four eyes glowed with genuine amusement at the absurdity of the situation. Deploy 3 patrol groups, Vex ordered, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. Make it quick and efficient. I want this matter resolved before the next council meeting. Vex hesitated for a moment, remembering the final transmission from the destroyed human vessel. Sir, the human captain's last words suggested some kind of warning or threat. Perhaps we should consider, suggested what? Vex interrupted, his voice sharp with irritation. That we should fear dead cargo haulers. That a species barely capable of interstellar flight poses some hidden danger to our forces. The other council members joined their leader's laughter, filling the chamber with sounds of mockery and derision. The idea that humans could threaten the hegemony was so ridiculous that several commanders actually had tears in their eyes from laughing so hard. Commander Quarks will handle the Earth operation, Vex decided, naming one of his most experienced field officers. Have him broadcast the destruction of that cargo vessel to every human colony. Let them see what defiance brings to those who oppose the hegemony. Within hours of the council meeting's conclusion, 3 patrol groups, consisting of 45 warships, departed from hegemony space toward the Sol system. Each group was more than capable of conquering a small civilization on its own, and together, they represented overwhelming force by any reasonable military standard. The ships moved through hyperspace with confidence, their crews expecting an easy victory that would be over before most of them had time to become bored. But as the hegemony fleet approached human space, something unexpected happened. No desperate government transmissions begged for mercy. No human fleet rose to meet them in a hopeless last stand. No terrified civilians attempted to flee to distant colonies. Earth and its surrounding systems remained completely silent, as if the entire human civilization had simply vanished into the void of space. Commander Quarks found this silence puzzling, but he attributed it to fear and shock at the approaching doom. Soon enough, he would discover just how wrong that assumption was. The message traveled through subspace faster than any physical object could move, reaching the farthest corners of known space in a matter of minutes. It was encoded in a frequency that most species would dismiss as background radiation, but every human receiver in the galaxy was programmed to recognize the specific pattern. The transmission was brief, containing only 3 words that would change everything. Lisa Chen stood in the cramped control room of Mining Station Delta 7, located in the asteroid belt of a system so remote that it did not even appear on most star charts. She had been working the night shift, monitoring the automated drilling equipment that carved precious metals from the floating rocks around her station. The work was lonely and dangerous, but it provided perfect cover for her real purpose in this forgotten corner of space. Her personal communicator beeped with an incoming message, and she glanced at the display, expecting routine updates from the mining company. Instead, she saw the words that she had been waiting 3 years to receive. Remember Mike Torres? Lisa immediately stopped what she was doing and moved to a sealed panel behind her workstation. Her fingers entered a complex code, and the panel slid open to reveal equipment that had nothing to do with mining asteroids. Banks of communication gear, Signal processors and quantum transmitters filled the hidden compartment. She had assembled this array, piece by piece, over many months, disguising each component as routine maintenance supplies or personal belongings. Her hands moved quickly across the controls, activating systems that had remained dormant since her arrival at the mining station. Displays flickered to life, showing star charts marked with locations that would mean nothing to casual observers, but represented years of careful intelligence gathering. Each marked position was a hegemony supply route, military base, or communication relay that she had been watching and studying, thousands of light years away. Jack Williams received the same message while piloting his cargo hauler along a trade route that passed dangerously close to hegemony space. His ship, the Wandering Star, appeared to be nothing more than an aging freight vessel carrying manufactured goods between human colonies. The hull was dented and scarred from years of use, and the engines made concerning noises that suggested they might fail at any moment. But appearances could be deceiving. Hidden beneath panels that looked like ordinary cargo containers were sensor arrays more sophisticated than anything the hegemony suspected humans possessed. Jack had spent 2 years mapping every hegemony patrol route, supply schedule, and communication frequency in this sector. His trade runs were perfectly timed to observe military movements while maintaining the appearance of routine commercial activity. When the activation message reached him, Jack quietly altered his course toward a supply depot that most people believed had been abandoned years ago. In reality, the facility was a carefully maintained storage point for equipment and supplies that would soon be needed. His ship's manifest listed his cargo as farm machinery and medical supplies, but the sealed containers actually held something much more dangerous. Beth Rodriguez managed an agricultural station on the frontier world of New Kansas, where she grew food crops for the scattered human settlements in the region. Her facility looked exactly like what it claimed to be, with vast fields of grain and vegetable crops stretching to the horizon. Automated farming equipment moved through the rows of plants, tending them with mechanical precision. To any outside observer, it was a peaceful and productive operation. The truth was far more complex. Beth had been recruited 5 years ago, while working as a logistics coordinator for the human colonial government. Her background in supply chain management made her perfect for her current role, which involved much more than growing food. The farming equipment stored in her warehouses included items that would never be found on any agricultural world. When she received the activation message, Beth walked calmly to her main storage facility and began conducting an inventory that she had memorized long ago. Crates marked as fertilizer contained explosives. Containers labeled as irrigation supplies held advanced communication equipment. Farm vehicles had been modified with hidden compartments that stored weapons and surveillance gear. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out as the human network came to life. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who ran a medical clinic on a refugee station, began preparing supplies that had nothing to do with treating illness. Mark Thompson, who operated a small shipping company, started loading his vessels with cargo that was not listed on any official manifest. Janet Foster, who managed a research facility studying stellar phenomena, activated monitoring equipment that had been watching hegemony military communications for months. Each of these individuals appeared to be ordinary civilians pursuing mundane occupations in remote locations. They lived quiet lives, maintained normal relationships with their neighbors, and showed no signs of military training or hostile intentions. But they shared a common secret that connected them across vast distances and united them in a purpose that the hegemony had never suspected. Years ago, human intelligence services had recognized that their species was expanding into a dangerous galaxy filled with hostile powers. Traditional military approaches would be inadequate against enemies with superior technology and overwhelming numbers. Instead, they had developed a different strategy based on patience. careful observation, and hidden preparation. Every human who left Earth to work in distant colonies or remote stations was thoroughly screened and evaluated. Those with the right skills and temperament were recruited for special assignments that looked like ordinary jobs, but served a much larger purpose. They became the eyes and ears of humanity in unexplored regions, gathering intelligence while maintaining perfect cover identities. The network had been growing slowly and carefully for decades. Each operative knew only a small part of the overall plan, but together they formed a web of observation and preparation that stretched across multiple star systems. They watched enemy movements, mapped supply routes, identified weaknesses, and stockpiled resources for a day that everyone hoped would never come. Mike Torres had been more than just a cargo captain making a supply run. He was a key node in the network, and his death was the predetermined signal that would activate every sleeper agent, every hidden cache, and every carefully prepared plan. His sacrifice had not been meaningless heroics, but a calculated decision that would give his people the warning they needed to survive. The network was no longer sleeping. Across the galaxy, ordinary humans in ordinary jobs were transforming into something the hegemony had never encountered before. Commander Vex sat in his command center, surrounded by glowing screens that displayed information from across 3-star sectors. The steady flow of reports had started 3 days ago as routine operational updates, but now they painted a picture that made his stomach feel cold with growing fear. His 4 eyes moved quickly from one display to another, trying to understand what was happening to his forces scattered throughout hegemony space. The first incident had seemed like an accident. Transport Convoy 7 Alpha had missed its scheduled check-in while carrying supplies to a forward military base. When search teams found the wreckage 2 days later, the evidence suggested a catastrophic engine failure that destroyed all 12 ships. The cargo of weapons and ammunition had been completely vaporized, leaving nothing useful for enemy forces to salvage. But accidents kept happening with disturbing frequency. Communication relay stations began going offline without explanation. Military supply depots reported equipment malfunctions that destroyed critical stockpiles. Patrol ships encountered navigation problems that sent them far off course, leaving important sectors undefended for hours at a time. Each incident appeared to be an isolated problem, but together they created a pattern that Dex was only beginning to recognize. Captain Roth entered the command center, carrying multiple data pads, filled with intelligence reports from field commanders throughout the region. His normally confident expression was replaced by obvious worry, and his uniform showed signs of the long hours he had been spending analyzing the growing crisis. He approached Dex's station with the careful movements of someone delivering bad news to a superior officer. "Sir, I have completed the analysis you requested," Roth said, his voice tight with barely controlled concern. "The intelligence division believes we are dealing with coordinated attacks rather than random equipment failures." Vex gestured for his aide to continue, while pulling up a tactical display that showed hegemony territory across multiple star systems. The holographic map was marked with red indicators showing the locations of recent incidents. What had looked like scattered problems now revealed a disturbing pattern when viewed from this broader perspective. "Show me the details," Dex ordered. Though part of him did not want to hear what Roth had discovered, the tactical display zoomed in to show specific attack sites. Each red mark represented a carefully chosen target that would cause maximum disruption to hegemony operations. Supply convoys had been hit at precisely the moments when their cargo was most needed. Communication relays had gone dark just before important military operations. Equipment failures occurred exactly when backup systems were offline for maintenance. "These humans have been studying our operations for years," Roth explained, while highlighting different sections of the display. "Every trade ship that passed through our territory, every civilian transport that requested passage, every diplomatic mission, they were all gathering intelligence about our supply routes." communication schedules, and operational procedures. They felt his confidence crumble as he realized the scope of what they were facing. The hegemony had allowed hundreds of human vessels to travel through their space over the past decade, treating them as harmless merchants and refugees seeking safe passage. Security checks had been minimal because humans were considered too primitive to pose any real threat. Now it seemed that every one of those encounters had been part of a larger intelligence-gathering operation. "Look at this pattern," Roth continued, manipulating the display to show attack timing. "They knew exactly when our supply convoys would be most vulnerable. They had detailed information about our communication protocols. They even knew the maintenance schedules for our equipment. The implications were staggering. Human intelligence services had been watching and learning for years while maintaining perfect cover identities. Their cargo ships had carried sensors instead of trade goods. Their diplomatic missions had included trained spies who memorized everything they saw. Their requests for humanitarian aid had been opportunities to study hegemony military procedures." Vex pulled up files on recent human contacts, seeing them now in a completely different light. The merchant captain, who had requested fuel 3 months ago, had actually been observing their refueling procedures. The refugee transport that had needed repairs had used the time to study their maintenance facilities. The diplomatic courier, who had delivered trade proposals, had been mapping their command structure. "How many of our bases have been compromised?" Lex asked, though he suspected the answer would be worse than he wanted to hear. Roth checked his datapad before responding. "Intelligence estimates that humans have gathered detailed information about at least 47 military installations, 200 supply routes, and countless communication networks throughout this region." The command center fell silent, except for the quiet humming of electronic equipment. Vex stared at the tactical display, watching as more red marks appeared to indicate new incidents. The attacks were accelerating, and each strike was perfectly timed to cause maximum damage while minimizing human casualties. This was not the work of desperate refugees fighting for survival. It was the calculated strategy of a professional military organization. Sir Roth said quietly, "There's something else you need to see." The tactical display flickered and changed. It's holographic. Projections replaced by the image of a human woman. She appeared to be in her 50s, with short gray hair and eyes that seemed to look directly at Dex, despite the fact that this was obviously a recorded message. Her expression was calm and confident, showing no signs of fear or desperation. "This is Admiral Susan Clark of the Human Defense Network," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "You killed Captain Mike Torres, a good man who was trying to save lives. Now you will learn why that was a mistake." Vex leaned forward in his chair, studying the woman's face for any sign of deception or bluff. What he saw instead was the quiet determination of someone who had been planning for this moment for a very long time. "For years, you have dismissed humans as primitive and weak," Admiral Clark continued. "You have allowed our people to move freely through your territory because you believed we posed no threat. You have shared information with our diplomats because you thought we were too simple to understand its value. You have been wrong about everything." The message ended, leaving Nex staring at a blank screen while trying to process the full scope of what he had just learned. The humans had not been caught off guard by hegemony aggression. They had been preparing for it all along. "Supreme Commander." Vex stood in the center of his war room, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the current state of hegemony military operations across dozens of star systems. The massive chamber had been designed to intimidate visitors with its size and grandeur, but now it felt more like a prison as reports of failure continued to arrive from every corner of their territory. His 4 eyes burned with rage as he watched. Red warning lights flash across the tactical maps. The latest report came from Battle Group Theta, which had been patrolling the outer regions near human space. Commander Zarl's voice crackled through the communication system, filled with frustration and confusion. "Supreme Commander, We have lost 3 more supply ships. The enemy struck during our scheduled refueling operation at Station Omega 15. Vex slammed his armored fist down on the command console with such force that the metal surface cracked. How are they doing this? He roared, his voice echoing through the chamber. Our ships are superior in every way. Our weapons are more powerful. Our armor is thicker. Our shields are stronger. The holographic display showed the wreckage of the destroyed supply vessels floating in space around the refueling station. Security footage revealed nothing useful. The attack had come from multiple directions simultaneously, using weapons that appeared to be modified hegemony technology. The enemy had struck with perfect timing, hitting the convoy at its most vulnerable moment when the ships were connected to fuel lines and unable to maneuver quickly. Commander Vex materialized as a hologram in the war room, transmitting from his position on the front lines where he had been trying to coordinate defensive operations. His uniform was wrinkled from days without rest, and his expression showed the strain of fighting an enemy that refused to follow conventional military tactics. "They're not fighting us, ship to ship, sir," Vex reported, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "They hit us when we're refueling, when we're conducting repairs, when our crews are sleeping during rest periods. They use our own weapons against us, modified and improved in ways our engineers never considered." Vex studied the tactical reports that showed a pattern of attacks, unlike anything the hegemony had encountered in 3 centuries of conquest. Traditional battles involved fleets meeting in open space, exchanging fire until one side was defeated or withdrew. But these humans seemed to have no interest in honorable combat. They struck from hiding places, used captured equipment, and disappeared before hegemony forces could respond effectively. "They've turned space itself into a trap," Vex continued. "Every asteroid field might hide enemy ships. Every abandoned station could be a weapons cache. Every piece of floating debris might contain sensors watching our movements." The reports painted a picture that filled Vex with growing dread. Human forces appeared to materialize from empty space, strike with devastating precision at carefully chosen targets, then vanish completely before retaliation was possible. They had somehow learned to move through space without being detected by hegemony sensors, using techniques that should have been impossible with their primitive technology. Admiral Corks, who commanded the patrol groups sent to intimidate Earth, added his own disturbing observations. "Sir, we captured one of their agents yesterday during a raid on a supply depot. Under interrogation, he revealed that humans have been studying our military procedures for decades. They know our refueling schedules, our maintenance routines, even our crew rotation patterns. The prisoner had been a middle-aged human who appeared to be nothing more than a civilian mechanic working at a remote repair facility. But when hegemony forces searched his workshop, they discovered sophisticated communication equipment and detailed files containing information about hegemony ship designs, weapon specifications, and tactical procedures. The man had been gathering intelligence for years while maintaining perfect cover as an ordinary technician." "How many of these agents do they have embedded throughout our territory?" Vex demanded, though he suspected the answer would be worse than he wanted to hear. "Intelligence estimates suggest hundreds, possibly thousands," Dex replied. "Every human civilian we've encountered in the past decade could have been a spy. Every trade mission, every diplomatic contact, every request for humanitarian aid might have been part of their intelligence-gathering operation." Vex felt his confidence crumbling as he realized the scope of human preparation. The hegemony had allowed enemy agents to move freely through their space for years, treating them as harmless refugees and merchants. Those same agents had been watching, learning, and preparing for exactly this kind of conflict. The tactical display updated with new information, showing attacks accelerating across multiple sectors. Human forces were striking supply convoys, communication relays, and military installations with increasing frequency and effectiveness. Each attack was perfectly timed and precisely executed, suggesting a level of coordination that should have been impossible for such a small and supposedly primitive civilization. "They don't fight fair," General Mox observed from his position at the strategic planning table. "They attack from hiding, use unconventional weapons, and refuse to engage in proper battles." "They fight smart," Vex corrected grimly. "They've studied our weaknesses and developed tactics specifically designed to exploit them. They're not trying to match our strength, they're trying to make our strength irrelevant." Vex stared at the displays showing hegemony losses mounting across their territory. The humans were making his massive military machine look clumsy and predictable. Worse, they were doing it while maintaining the appearance of being weak and defenseless. Every time hegemony forces thought they had located the enemy, the humans would strike somewhere else entirely. "Enough of this," Vex declared, his voice filled with desperate rage. "If they want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget. Launch the Grand Fleet. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier we have. We'll burn their homeworld to ash and end this once and for all." The war room fell silent as the other commanders processed this order. The Grand Fleet represented the full military might of the hegemony, thousands of warships that had never been defeated in battle. It was overwhelming force that could destroy entire civilizations. Vex hesitated before responding. "Sir, perhaps we should reconsider this approach. The humans seem to be leading us toward. Are you questioning my orders, Commander?" Vex interrupted, his eyes glowing with dangerous intensity. "No, sir," Vex replied, snapping to attention with a military salute. But as he transmitted the fleet mobilization orders to bases throughout hegemony space, Vex couldn't shake the growing feeling that they were making exactly the mistake the humans wanted them to make. The Kaleri Grand Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system in a display of military power that had never been matched in the history of galactic warfare. 2,000 warships materialized in perfect formation, their dark hulls reflecting the distant light of Earth's sun as they took up positions according to battle plans that had been refined over centuries of conquest. The largest vessels were massive dreadnoughts, each one capable of destroying entire cities with a single barrage. Surrounding them were cruisers, destroyers, and support ships that formed a wall of metal and weaponry stretching across millions of kilometers of space. Supreme Commander Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching through the main view screen as his forces prepared for what he expected to be the final battle of this brief war. The ship around him hummed with power as weapons, systems charged and targeting computers, calculated firing solutions for the planet that hung like a blue jewel in the darkness ahead. His crew worked with efficient precision, following procedures they had practiced countless times during previous campaigns against other civilizations. "All fleet commanders report ready for battle," announced Communications Officer Trix from her station near the rear of the bridge. "Weapon systems are fully charged. Shields are at maximum power. All ships are holding formation and awaiting your orders." Vex nodded with satisfaction as he studied the tactical display that showed his fleet's overwhelming numerical advantage. The humans had no chance against this level of firepower. Even if they had somehow managed to gather every ship in their entire civilization, they would still be outnumbered 10-1 by vessels that were far superior in every aspect of design and construction. "Target the third planet," Vex commanded, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. "Prepare for planetary bombardment. I want this ended quickly and completely." The bridge crew began implementing the attack plan that would reduce Earth's major population centers to smoking ruins within hours, targeting computers locked onto cities, military installations, and industrial complexes, while the massive weapons arrays of the Grand Fleet swiveled to aim at their intended victims. The bombardment would be systematic and thorough, leaving no possibility for human resistance to continue. Commander Vex stood at his own station, monitoring the tactical situation with growing unease that he could not explain. Everything appeared to be proceeding according to plan, but something felt wrong about the entire situation. The approach to Earth had been too easy, with no sign of the human fleet that should have been defending their homeworld. The planet's orbital defenses looked pathetically weak compared to what they had encountered at other civilized worlds. "Sir," called out sensor operator Vex from his position near the main display. "I'm detecting minimal defensive activity from the planet. A few orbital platforms and some small patrol vessels, but nothing that could threaten our forces." The Grand Fleet began its stately advance toward Earth, maintaining perfect formation as it closed the distance to weapons range. The journey would take several hours at their current speed, giving the human population time to contemplate their approaching doom. This psychological warfare was an important part of hegemony strategy, designed to break enemy morale before the actual fighting began. As they moved deeper into the Sol system, Vex noticed the large number of asteroids and space debris scattered throughout the area. Most star systems had some amount of rocky material floating between planets, but this seemed unusually dense. Ancient mining operations had apparently left behind extensive networks of tunnels and excavated rocks that drifted in complex orbital patterns around the Sun. Navigation reports minor course corrections needed to avoid asteroid collisions, announced the helm officer. "The debris field is more extensive than our charts indicated." Vex dismissed this as a minor inconvenience. Human mining operations were probably crude and inefficient, leaving behind more waste material than necessary. It would not interfere with their mission objectives, merely requiring careful navigation to avoid damage to their ship hulls. The first sign that something was wrong came from the sensor stations throughout the fleet. Operators began reporting unusual energy readings from various directions, but the signals were weak and intermittent. Initially, these were dismissed as background radiation or interference from solar activity. But as the Grand Fleet continued its advance, the readings became stronger and more consistent. "Sir," the sensor operator called out with growing concern in his voice, "I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. The patterns are consistent with reactor cores and weapon systems, but I can't pinpoint exact locations." Vex moved to examine the sensor data personally, his 4 eyes studying the readings with increasing alarm. The energy signatures were definitely artificial, indicating the presence of technology rather than natural phenomena, but they seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, scattered across the entire Sol system in a pattern that made no tactical sense. Then the asteroids began moving. What had appeared to be lifeless chunks of rock suddenly came alive with purpose, breaking from their natural orbits to reveal the sleek hulls of warships that had been perfectly camouflaged. Massive vessels emerged from hollowed-out asteroids, their weapons already trained on the approaching hegemony fleet. Smaller fighters poured out of hidden bases carved into seemingly solid rocks, swarming toward their targets with deadly intent. "Sir," the sensor operator called out, his voice now filled with panic, "I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. Those aren't asteroids, they're ships, thousands of them." The tactical display erupted with new contacts as human vessels revealed themselves from every direction. What had appeared to be empty space was suddenly filled with enemy forces that had been waiting in perfect ambush positions. Ancient space stations that had seemed abandoned were powering up weapon systems. Derelict spacecraft were shedding their camouflage to reveal fully operational warships. Even pieces of floating debris were transforming into mobile weapons platforms. "We're surrounded," Dex breathed, watching his tactical display light up with thousands of new contacts that appeared to have materialized from nowhere. The Sol system wasn't defenseless. It was a carefully prepared killing field that had been designed to trap exactly this kind of massive assault force. Every asteroid, every piece of space junk, every seemingly innocent object had been converted into a hidden fortress or weapons platform. The humans had spent decades preparing this ambush, waiting patiently for their enemies to walk directly into the trap. Admiral Clark's voice echoed across all communication frequencies, calm and confident, as she addressed the trapped hegemony. "Fleet, welcome to Sol, hegemony. Mike Torres sends his regards." The destruction of the Kaleri Grand Fleet began at exactly 1432 Standard Galactic Time and lasted precisely 17 minutes. Commander Vex watched from the bridge of his burning cruiser as the most powerful military force in known galactic history was systematically torn apart by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive and weak. The tactical displays around him flickered with dying light as ship after ship vanished from the screens, each disappearance marking the death of hundreds or thousands of hegemony personnel. The human attack was unlike anything Vex had witnessed in his 25 years of military service. There were no dramatic space battles with ships trading volleys across vast distances. Instead, the hidden human forces struck with surgical precision, targeting critical systems and weak points that should have been impossible for them to know about. Weapons fire came from every direction simultaneously, making it impossible for hegemony vessels to coordinate their defenses or mount any meaningful counterattack. Supreme Commander Vex's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, lasted less than 3 minutes once the ambush began. Vex watched in horror as concentrated fire from dozens of human ships overwhelmed the massive dreadnought's shields and tore through its armored hull. The vessel that had served as the symbol of hegemony power for over a century broke apart in a series of brilliant explosions, taking with it the military leader who had never known defeat. "Sir, we're losing main power," reported Engineering Officer Crix from his station near the rear of Vex's bridge. "The humans are targeting our reactor cores with some kind of penetrating weapon that ignores our shields." Vex nodded grimly as he studied the sensor readings that showed human forces using modified hegemony technology against its creators. The weapons appeared to be based on captured Kaleri designs, but they had been improved and refined in ways that made them far more effective than the originals. Decades of careful study had allowed human engineers to identify weaknesses that even hegemony designers had never recognized. Around the Sol system, the carefully orchestrated destruction continued with mechanical efficiency. Human commanders were clearly following a predetermined plan that left nothing to chance. They knew exactly which ships to target first, which systems to disable, and how to prevent any hegemony vessel from escaping to warn other forces. The trap had been designed not just to defeat the Grand Fleet, but to ensure complete annihilation. "They're jamming all our communications," reported Communications Officer Lance, his voice tight with fear. "I can't reach any of our bases or send distress signals. It's like they know our encryption codes and communication protocols." The realization hit Dex with devastating clarity. The humans had not simply been gathering intelligence about hegemony supply routes and military procedures. They had been studying every aspect of Kaleri technology and organization, learning secrets that would allow them to completely disrupt their enemy's ability to function as a coordinated force. His own ship, the battlecruiser Vengeance, shuddered under repeated impacts from human weapons that seemed to find every vulnerable spot in its design. The bridge lights flickered as power systems failed throughout the vessel. Smoke began filling the air as fires broke out in critical areas that damage control teams could no longer reach. "Sir," called out Tactical Officer Nex from his position at the weapons console, "our main batteries are offline. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 15. We're losing life support in the forward sections." Vex activated his personal communication system, hoping to record some final message that might somehow reach other hegemony forces. His words would probably never be heard, but he felt compelled to try to warn others about what they were truly facing. "They knew," he whispered into the comm unit, watching as more ships disappeared from his tactical display. "They knew we would come in force. They wanted us all here, in one place, where they could destroy everything at once." The bridge around him groaned as the ship's structural integrity began to fail. Through the main view screen, he could see human vessels moving, with purpose and coordination that spoke of years of planning and preparation. This was not a desperate last stand by a cornered enemy. It was the execution of a strategy that had been decades in the making. His transmission cut to static as the Vengeance's communication array was destroyed by enemy fire. Moments later, the ship's reactor core suffered a catastrophic failure that vaporized the entire vessel in a flash of brilliant light. Dex joined the thousands of other hegemony personnel who died that day, taking with them any hope of warning their civilization about the true nature of human capabilities. But the destruction in the Sol system was only the beginning of humanity's carefully orchestrated revenge. Across hegemony space, sleeper agents who had been living quiet lives as civilians for years suddenly revealed their true purpose. The network that had been gathering intelligence was now activating for direct action, striking at targets throughout Kalari territory with the same precision and coordination displayed at Earth. Dr. Janet Miller, who had been running a medical clinic on the frontier world of Kalto 7 for 3 years, sealed her facility and activated hidden weapon systems that she had assembled piece by piece over many months. Her medical supplies included enough explosives to destroy the nearby hegemony military depot that supplied 12 different star systems. Mark Johnson, who operated a small shipping company in the outer regions, revealed that his cargo vessels were actually disguised warships carrying battle-hardened human soldiers. His crews had been carefully mapping hegemony installations and defenses, while maintaining perfect cover as harmless merchants. Lisa Thompson, who managed a communications relay station that connected hegemony forces across multiple sectors, used her access to critical systems to shut down military communications at precisely the moment when coordination was most desperately needed, without the ability to share information or coordinate responses. Isolated hegemony units were picked off one by one. The pattern repeated itself throughout Kalari space as hundreds of seemingly innocent human civilians revealed themselves to be highly trained operatives who had been waiting years for this moment. Supply lines were severed, communication networks went dark, and military installations found themselves under attack from enemies who knew their weaknesses better than they knew themselves. The hegemony had underestimated humans for the final time. This time there would be no survivors to warn the next species that made the same fatal mistake. Ambassador David Park walked through the marble corridors of the diplomatic station that orbited the neutral world of Kepler Prime. The building had been designed to impress visitors with its grand architecture and expensive materials, but Park barely noticed the decorative elements around him. His mind was focused on the meeting that lay ahead, a conversation that would determine whether another galactic war could be avoided. The diplomatic station served as neutral ground where different species could meet to discuss treaties, trade, agreements, and territorial disputes without fear of attack. Representatives from dozens of civilizations maintained offices in the massive structure, which rotated slowly in orbit to provide artificial gravity through centrifugal force. Today, the station hosted a meeting that could shape the future of human expansion into unexplored regions of the galaxy. Park entered Conference Room 7, a spacious chamber with a long oval table surrounded by chairs designed to accommodate various alien body types. Large windows provided a view of the planet below, its surface covered with blue oceans and green continents that reminded him of Earth. The room's lighting could be adjusted for different species. Visual requirements and translation devices were built into each seating position. The Zorian Empire delegation was already waiting for him when he arrived. 5 representatives sat along one side of the table, their blue-scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights. Each Zorian wore elaborate ceremonial armor decorated with symbols indicating their rank and achievements in battle. Their leader, Commander Vaxes, was an imposing figure whose crest flared with bright colors that showed his emotional state. Ambassador Park, Commander Vaxis said in a deep voice that carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed, without question. "We appreciate you accepting our invitation to discuss the future relationship between our civilizations." Park took his seat across from the Zorian delegation, placing a slim briefcase on the table before him. His appearance was unremarkable compared to the alien warriors he faced, a middle-aged human in a simple gray suit who looked more like a businessman than a diplomatic representative, but his calm expression and steady gaze suggested depths that the Zorians had not yet recognized. "Thank you for arranging this meeting," Park replied politely. "I understand you have some proposals regarding human expansion into sectors that you consider part of your territory." Commander Vaxis leaned forward, his crest rising higher, as he prepared to deliver what he clearly expected to be an intimidating ultimatum. "Your species is young and inexperienced in galactic politics. You have been expanding too quickly into regions that rightfully belong to more established powers." The other Zorian representatives nodded in agreement, their scaled faces showing expressions of superiority and condescension. They had clearly come to this meeting expecting to dictate terms to a primitive species that would have no choice but to accept their demands. "We have conquered over 100 worlds in the past 2 centuries, Vaxis continued, his voice growing louder as he spoke. "Our fleets are the most powerful in this sector of the galaxy. Our warriors are trained from birth to fight and die in service to the Empire." Park listened patiently while the Zorian commander recited a list of military victories and territorial acquisitions that were designed to demonstrate his civilization's strength. The presentation included holographic displays showing Zorian warships, conquered planets, and subjugated alien populations that had been forced to serve their new masters. "Submit now to Zorian authority," Vaxis declared when he finished his presentation, "and we may allow you to maintain some autonomy over your existing colonies. Continue your unauthorized expansion, and we will be forced to take military action to protect our interests." The conference room fell silent as the Zorian delegation waited for Park's response. They clearly expected him to express fear or to begin negotiating for better terms. Instead, the human ambassador smiled politely and opened his briefcase to remove a single data pad. "Before we discuss any terms," Park said in a conversational tone, "I'm curious about something. Have you spoken with the Kalari hegemony about humanity? They maintained extensive files on our species and our capabilities." Commander Vax's crest flared with irritation at the mention of another galactic power. "The hegemony no longer exists," he said dismissively. "They were weak and poorly led. Our intelligence reports indicate they were destroyed by some minor conflict in their outer regions." Park nodded as if this information was not particularly surprising. "How unfortunate," he said, his smile never wavering. "They might have warned you about certain aspects of human nature that could be relevant to our current discussion." The Zorian representatives exchanged glances of confusion. They had clearly expected the human to be intimidated by their threats, not to make cryptic references to a defeated enemy. Commander Vaxis leaned forward, his confidence beginning to show cracks. "Warned us about what?" he demanded, his voice showing the first signs of uncertainty. Park stood slowly, straightening his jacket with deliberate care. His movements were calm and controlled, but there was something in his expression that made the Zorian warriors suddenly feel less certain about their position. "The Kalari hegemony made the same mistake you're making now," Park explained, his voice remaining conversational despite the deadly serious nature of his words. "They assumed that because humans appear peaceful and reasonable, we must be weak and easily intimidated." He activated his datapad, and a holographic display appeared above the conference table. The image showed the wreckage of thousands of Kalari warships floating in the darkness of space around Earth's sun. The destruction was so complete that most of the vessels had been reduced to small pieces of twisted metal. "This is what remains of their grand fleet," Park continued, his tone never changing from polite conversation. 2,000 of their most advanced warships, destroyed in 17 minutes by forces they never saw coming. The Zorian representatives stared at the holographic display with growing horror. Commander Vaxis's crest had flattened against his skull, and his blue skin had taken on a pale shade that indicated fear. They had been studying us for years, Park explained, just as we had been studying them. The difference was that they dismissed us as primitive cargo haulers and refugees. We saw them as a threat that needed to be eliminated completely. The silence in the conference room was broken only by the quiet humming of the station's life support systems. The Zorian delegation was beginning to understand that they had made a serious mistake in their assessment of human capabilities. Park closed his data pad and returned it to his briefcase. The hegemony learned too late that humans never forget an insult, he said, looking directly at Commander Vaxis. And we never forgive those who threaten innocent people. He walked toward the door, pausing to deliver his final words. I suggest you reconsider your approach to diplomacy with humanity. The next time we meet, it would be better if you came as friends rather than conquerors. The end.